Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, if you've ever studied history, and that's probably most of you, chances are you've studied empires. Now, if you've studied recent history, chances are you've been told at some point that empires break up and give way to nation-states, smaller entities with their own national identity, flags, anthems, and sovereignty. Well, my guest today says not so fast, because history is rarely that cut and dry, and that empires are a very durable form of state. They're able to adapt and take on ever different forms. Jane Burbank, welcome to France 24. You're a professor of history as well as a specialist in Russian studies, Slavic studies at New York University.
That's right.
And you're here today really because you are co-author of a book with your colleague Frederick Cooper called, and we could show our viewers right now, Empires in World History, Power and the Politics of Difference, which won the World Book History Association Prize this year for 2011. Yeah. It's a long title, but I want to cut straight to the chase. You basically admit early on in your book you couldn't possibly write about every empire in world history. It would take several lifetimes to do that. You chose to concentrate on a landmass which you call Eurasia, and you take as your starting points China and Rome in the 3rd century BC. Why did you choose those empires as your starting points? What is it about them?
Well, we wanted to make sure that people saw that there are different ways to run an empire. And if you start with Rome and China, you see two very powerful empires whose influence lasted for a very long time, but whose ways of running their polities were quite different.
They had different models. I think you call them in your book, you call them imperial repertoires.
Yes.
What do you mean by that concept?
We wanted to show that in their ways of governing, empires had different tools, different ways of approaching the common challenges that they all faced. Now, one of those challenges is how to govern people who are different. Empires, by definition, reach out and bring in people with different faiths, different ways of life. And we wanted to show that this challenge is confronted in different ways by different imperial polities.
The Roman Empire, for example, the people it conquered, to what extent did it really let them keep their own identities, their own cultural identities?
In the beginning, in the early years of Rome, we can see that the areas conquered were perforce allowed to keep much of their way of living. But Rome developed a very interesting and we think enduring way of attracting people to its way of life.
We still talk about it today. The Roman Empire is still very relevant.
Yeah. And one of the attractions of Roman of belonging to Rome, and particularly for the elites of local societies to join the Roman project, was the rights of Roman citizens. So we consider a very important event in world history the creation of the idea of a citizenship that can be extended beyond one's own people to others.
Rome, in a weird way, and we'll get to this in a second, it was a very early nation, a giant nation-state. We talk about nation-states today, right? Couldn't you say because they granted citizenship in that concept, it was a nation-state in a sense?
Well, we're very uneasy with this extension of the idea of nation-state back into the past.
Okay, put me in my place.
In fact, although so many of us grew up with the idea that the nation-state was the inevitable end of history, and that it had been developing since at least the 19th, maybe the 18th century. In fact, even the word and the term is quite recent. It comes really from the middle of the 20th century.
After the war, World War II, yeah.
After the war. So what we want to make clear is that there were different complex polities with different approaches to integrating people. But they were not about, and Rome was not about, one people, one government, one territory.
Clearly. Moving on chronologically, one of the perhaps most fearsome empires, and I grew up thinking this in school, the Mongols. We think of Genghis Khan charging across the steppe in the plain and conquering whatever was in his path. They were very fearsome, but it was a very successful imperial model.
Yes, successful model and successful conquest because the Mongols were the technologically most advanced from the point of view of military in the 13th century. They could pretty much go where they wanted across Eurasia. We consider them very important in this book because it's the Mongols in the 13th century who united Eurasia in some ways, and also who bequeathed certain ways of governing other people that have very long-lasting consequences.
Certain ways of brute force, no? Subjugation.
Well, brute force, of course, is the beginning, and it's the beginning of most empires.
I'm oversimplifying, okay.
It's the beginning of most empires. But what's very interesting about the Mongol way of running an empire is that first they allowed many people of different religions to coexist. They had no idea that there was one superior religion. Some of the great Khans converted to various religions. And so the Mongol way of rule took for granted the fact that people of different faiths would be part of their empires.
There was that diversity. It wasn't a monotheistic culture at all, in any respect. Now, your specialty is Russia, the Russian Empire. And the Russian polity, if we could call it that, I guess, took shape, in the 14th, 15th century. And I just want to, for purposes of comparison, compare it to, say, how the U.S. built its empire. The Russians, they acquired land. They just kept going across. And how do they differ, the U.S. models and the Russian model?
The Russian model, or the Russian way of making an empire, was, as you suggest, to keep expanding out from a center. But they're a clue to their success, and I would say a success to this day.
And we're showing pictures, actually, of, I think, the Romanov dynasty, which was already 20th century. We're going, I'm sorry.
A clue to their success was the idea that, yes, there were different faiths, different peoples, and rather than trying to integrate them all into a single citizenship, Roman style, we might say, the Russians basically let people run their local governance in their own way and let them keep their religion.
That continued up until the Soviet Union, in a sense, with the 15 republics.
Yeah, we can say that the Soviets inherited a lot of imperial expertise from Imperial Russia and then changed it in certain ways that made it a very successful, in terms of multiculturalism, a successful project of the 20th century.
And the United States, just to bring that in here, I think you wrote that was interesting is that they had essentially colonies, the same way the Europeans did, but they never really considered themselves the ruler of colonies. Why that distinction?
Well, we think that the U.S. in many ways inherited the Roman model in quite an extreme way. And if we think about a contrast between Russia and the United States in the 19th century, for example, the recipe for the United States, which was, after all, called an empire of liberty, was that eventually the entire continent would be formed of states governed by the same rules and of citizens, equal citizens. But certain people were excluded. Indians, slaves.
Indians and the slaves as well, which was a unique, almost uniquely American model of empire. I want to bring this up to a little fast forward to the present day now. There's this notion that after World War II, we saw the split up, well, after World War I, I suppose, the split up of the big empires, Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman Empire fell. We've been seeing more and more nation states. Are we going to see empires coming back, staging a comeback now in this age of globalization?
Well, let's back up a little bit.
A little bit, okay. I skipped only 4 centuries there.
No, but back up a little bit to after World War I.
Right.
Let's not forget that the 20th century witnessed the attempted formation of new empires. The Third Reich, Reich, after all, is an empire.
Right.
The Japanese Empire. Now, these two empires failed, and we could argue why they tried to, they were racist empires, an impossible project. But even after World War II, we do not see the empires of France and Great Britain breaking up immediately.
But we do see the end of the the colonies in North Africa for France, their independence.
In the 1950s. So
Okay.
it's a gradual process, and in many cases, the political actors in Africa, in French colonies, wanted to join a greater
A
project.
greater entity. We're running out of time, Jane Burbank. I just would like to leave you with this. You began with China in your book. I know, like we said, it doesn't cover all of history. It seems like history's come full circle. We're almost back with China. China once again being a rising dominant power in the world and an empire.
Yes, if we can take a perspective which is not focused on Western Europe and the United States, we can see that perhaps the weak China that we think about of the 19th century was only an interlude. An interlude.
A blip on the historical radar.
Yeah, between a very powerful Qing Empire and now a new China, which has imperial problems, but imperial strengths.
And imperial ambitions as well. Jane Burbank, we are going to have to leave it there. Professor of History at New York University. We've been talking about empires in world history, and I think I'm getting the sense that it's not the end of empire, not by a long shot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24. More news ahead.